Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first video of many in a series about space PvP and the fundamentals of space PvP. We'll be going over some advanced techniques and strategies in later videos. However, for this one, we're going to go over some bits and bobs that you should be aware of before starting space PvP. I have given a lot of one-to-one information, practice and training, and I've noticed that many pilots have not really configured their systems or games in a way that will allow them to excel, and so they start off on the back foot. So this video is a way of me providing you with some common pitfalls that people fall into, as well as some suggestions of my own. So the first thing we're going to go over today is the camera zoom. So for a lot of pilots that I help, this is how they see the game. So we're currently zoomed all the way in the third person mode, and the ship takes up the majority of the screen. Now this can mean tracking targets is quite challenging because you have a very narrow window with which you can see them, and so we're going to change that. So we're going to go settings, controls, and we're going to check the cockpit camera zoom multiplier, and we're just going to drag that out. See, now we see a lot less of our ship, or at least rather it takes up less space, and we can see more around us. Another useful setting that we can use for tracking opponents is go to graphics and increase our field of view. This can be increased quite dramatically. Personally, I prefer flying without it, but I appreciate that it helps with situational awareness, so find a setting that works for you. Do note that this field of view setting is shared both on ground and in space. So if you max it out when you land on the ground, your field of view will also be maxed out. Next up, we have camera elasticity. This setting controls how elastic your camera is, or how loose it is to the rear of your ship. Right now what you're seeing is myself with quite a high camera elasticity, and you can see that I'm able to watch my ship as it turns around. So let's see what that looks like with camera elasticity off or lowered. So first thing to do is go to options, go to interface, scroll about halfway down, and you'll see the camera elasticity. We're going to change that down to 0. Previously I had it around here, which is about 0.4. And as you can see, a remarkable difference. It's no longer floating behind my ship and is now rigid and attached. This is probably what you've seen a lot of YouTube videos on. If you've watched YouTube videos for space PvP, you'll see a lot of people flying their ship like this, and it's very helpful in PvP at times. A pro for this is going to be missiles. So missiles have a cone that is attached to the front of your ship, and in here we're able to see exactly where our ship is facing and what ships are potentially within that cone. As well as that, because our ship turns very quickly, our camera also turns very quickly, so in theory you're able to track your opponents a little bit faster. Some cons of that for me personally, and it is only going to be personal with this, is that I feel like every minor move I make dramatically changes the screen, and can mean for me it can be quite hard to track things. However, that's probably personal preference and just the fact that I'm very used to camera elasticity. And that's kind of all it's going to boil down to. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Fly what works. I haven't felt that camera elasticity has held me back too much, but there have certainly been scenarios where I've gone, ugh, if only I could see my opponent a little bit better. Now that we're used to seeing me fly around with camera elasticity off, let's just remind ourselves what that looks like when we've got it on. I'm just going to eyeball it there, and there we go. So as you can see, camera moving a lot more sluggish now. and you can see a bit more of what your ship's doing. And that's another thing I quite like about it. I get to see kind of where my ship's moving in relation to everything else, which I feel like I just don't get with camera elasticity off. Let's now talk a bit about Deadzone. So, what is Deadzone first and foremost? It's sort of a measurement of sensitivity. As I have a Deadzone box around me, and I'll just show that now by going to controls, and I've got my Deadzone here. So I've currently got my personal Deadzone set at 398, my game mouse sensitivity to 1.43. So if I change this, I'll just drag this over. If I change this, you can see there's a little box. As my mouse moves within that box, it translates that to performance of the ship by a percentage. So, for example, if I go down here, because my Deadzone is smaller, every movement has a greater percentage of that space. So I'm going to hit the boundaries a little bit quicker. So let's just check this out. So I'm going to go for very, very low. That's as low as it will go there, apparently. So we go for this, and you see now, and you might not be able to see this, but you can see the little indicator in the middle there. I'm moving my mouse very little, but it's translating into a very sensitive and quite janky movement. So what does this mean? Let's say, for example, one of your complaints is that it's just too twitchy. And right now I'm barely moving my mouse, and my ship is making big turns. So let's see if I can... There we go. So I finally killed it, but it took me a little while to get on target there. And so by increasing this Deadzone, we're just going to quickly see 398, I said, I think. Okay, let's keep going down. Okay, that's fine, that's fair enough. Now, I can make bigger moves and I can make smaller moves, so I can do kind of nice, smooth moves, or I can do tight moves. I've got the choice. Whereas with a lower Deadzone, that choice gets a little bit removed. The actual Deadzone that you're going to be using is down to your sensitivity and the hardware you're using. For me, 398 works. For you, it might not. You might like the twitchier style. You might not. You've also got the joystick Deadzone here. I'll let people who fly with joystick talk to you a bit about that. I have no idea. I'm not going to pretend to. Now we're going to go on to missiles. Missiles are a fundamental part of the game, and there are many different types of missiles. You'll often hear people complain about missiles, and that's for good reason. They're powerful, they can really turn the tides of a fight, and against heavy ships or ships with 2 or more tubes, they can be really devastating, and real equalizers for those ships. But we're not going to talk any about that. We're going to talk about launching missiles. So you might be used to launching missiles, such as going up to a target, and then you're going to wait for your dial tone, and then you're going to launch. In space PvP, that isn't a really poor way of doing things, mostly because your launch window is between when you get the launch and when you lose your target, because of how everyone's maneuvering around you. You're not really going to have time to press that launch button, especially as you've got lots of other things to think about. So what I recommend doing is we're going to select our target. It's going to be this heavy freighter here, and we're just going to hold down the launch button. You'll see there it's just coming up with you have not acquired your target. Let's get a little bit out of the way. There we go, I've not yet acquired a target, and there we go. And it automatically launches and kills the targets. So yeah, this is how you're going to want to space PvP. When you get into range of someone, just hold down that button. It's crucial to space PvP. There's some nuance, of course. Some missiles only do damage to shields, some missiles only do damage to armor. If your target has neither of those, don't launch the missile. As well as that, you want to use missiles when you can in two ways. One for dealing damage and the other for removing their chaff. There's also the removal of the chaff is also harassment, right? You just want to let them know you're there, and that could be quite helpful if you're following an opponent who's currently targeting a friendly and you're just trying to provide cover for them. Launching missiles is a good way of just letting them know that they've got someone on their rear and that they should be cautious of that. As well as that, running out of chaff can often mean the end of a PvP fight for an individual, as they will not be able to counter any missiles launched at them. However, in a 1v1 fight, you want to launch missiles when they're going to be most effective. So if your opponent is flying away from you, or there's a distance of greater than 200 meters, 300 meters, don't just take your finger off that launch missile button, and then reapply when it makes sense. This means that you will conserve your ammunition, because typically you have less missile ammo than they have chaff in a 1v1 scenario. Particularly with a single missile ship. For binding, the default bind is your right mouse button. I personally don't like it, and I always recommend to people who are flying with mouse and keyboard to go to their key map, go to their UI, go to... oh, it's not UI, apologies, it's ship, fire and cycle current ordnance group, and I changed that to spacebar. The reason for that is because whilst I'm using the Q, E, and W and S keys to fly, I can rest my thumb, just naturally rests on the spacebar. And that's what I'd recommend you do. Doesn't work for everyone. I know some pilots who prefer the right mouse button, and that works just fine for them. So yeah. Finally, we're going to be looking at chaff, or countermeasures. We're only going to be caring about chaff today because that's the most effective chaff currently available, so we don't need to concern ourselves with any of the others. Chaff works very simply. Every missile that gets fired at you requires a single point of chaff to stop. Chaff is always effective, so if I get a missile launched at me and I chaff, I will block that missile. Chaff does have a cooldown on it, however. Whilst it's minor, it looks a bit like this. So I'm going to hold the button down. 1, 2, 3, there we go. And so there could be instances where you may have a ship firing multiple tubes at you, and you might not be able to block them because you mechanically can't fire enough chaff in time before both of those missiles hit you. So just understand that that's an option. There are many 2 and 3 tube ships in the game. These often, so for Rebels, that includes the Y-Wing Long Probe and the B-Wing. Freelance gets a whole host of ships that can fire multiple tubes, but the common ones in space PvP is the Kimogila, the Havoc, and the Ixion. For Imperials, it is the TIE Bomber and the TIE Oppressor. However, the TIE Oppressor has 3 tubes. So that means that every time these ships launch a missile at you in PvP, they'll often be firing 2 or 3 missiles at a time, and you will need to chaff twice in quick succession. POBs also have multiple tubes, and you can look at those on the wiki page to understand a bit more information about that. Key mapping is pretty important. You are going to want to have chaff mapped, and you are going to want to have it mapped to something you can quickly get to. By default, this is the middle mouse button. I like it there. I know a lot of people choose otherwise. But regardless of where you map it, make sure you can reach it within a split second, because sometimes that's all you have. And when you're fighting an enemy ship, understand how many missiles they can potentially fire at you, and go from there. Well guys, thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you all found this to be a helpful and informative video. If you have any suggestions on improvements I can make, as well as any suggestions for things I can cover, please let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Until the next one, good luck, and I'll catch you then.